Walter White is a senior partner at McGuirewoods, which is a global law firm, and is the head of its emerging markets transactions practice. He has represented clients in many multi-billion-dollar business transactions and litigation throughout North America, Europe, the former Soviet Union, Asia, and Africa. And he has kindly given his time to share his story on Success Talks. So, firstly, welcome, Walter, and thank you for doing this. Do you care to give us a bit more about your background and why you chose law and how that's led to where you are currently?
I started learning about the law when I was a young man, and my parents and my family were involved in the civil rights movement. And I got to meet so many civil rights leaders and many dynamic lawyers, and I also had the opportunity to read about the impact that they were making on society in the 1950s and the 1960s. And it appealed to me. I appreciated facilitating justice. It was an exciting thing for me to do.
How did you get into law exactly, and why did you choose that route?
Well, I was a Russian major in high school and college just because I thought the language was interesting, and I loved the literature. It was also exciting to learn about a country that at the time we did not discuss a lot in the United States outside of the Cold War scenario. When I graduated from college with my degree in Russian, there weren't a lot of people interested in, unless you were going to teach Russian, which I was not really good enough to do, people with strong Russian language backgrounds. So I went to law school. And when I finished law school, there were not a lot of people interested in Russian-speaking lawyers, so I went to practice law in Wisconsin, which is where I'm from. And I practiced there for 14 years. And then in 1985, the world began to change with the creation of perestroika as a result of Gorbachev coming into power. And at that point, people reached out to me and encouraged me to travel back and forth to then the Soviet Union, and I was able to be a witness to many of the changes that were taking place there.
The Soviet Union then, compared to Russia now, is a very different place. What challenges did you face when you were out there, and how has that helped you?
Well, when I first went to the Soviet Union in 1973, it was a very closed place. There were tourists, there were Americans who traveled there, but they were not very large numbers. Conversely, there were not very many Soviets. Soviets had to be very privileged to travel to the United States or the West. Now, of course, the Russian Federation is largely open. People travel back and forth. There is much greater wealth as a result of the transition of the Soviet economy to what it is today. And many people are tremendously more wealthy than they were at the time that I was in the Soviet Union. Of course, it still has many of the great challenges that the Soviet Union always had.
And how about yourself from a personal perspective? What were the biggest issues that you experienced?
By the time I moved to Russia in 1994, I was very familiar with life in Russia and the republics, or now countries around it. I was very comfortable traveling around. My language was pretty good, and I had good support mechanisms. So I was quite comfortable doing business in the Russian Federation and living in Russia. I had many friends there. I had a lot of infrastructure support because my firm was doing interesting things, and I was working on a fairly high level with both government officials and business people.
And as a man of African American descent, were there any challenges out there from your experience?
Not so much for me personally. I had the luxury of being the person in between the companies who wanted investment and, say, the $5 billion that they were looking for as investment. So I tended to be treated quite well. I was very well known in the circles that I was dealing, so that most of the senior officers of major companies or senior ministry officials were familiar with me and my reputation. For the most part, I had a fascinating experience doing work around the 15 countries of the former Soviet Union.
And I remember reading that there was a bomb attack at some point during your time there. Do you mind to share that with us?
Well, having said that, there were traumatic events. The good news is the traumatic events tended not to be focused on me. When we first moved into our apartment in Moscow, I traveled to Kazakhstan, where I had an office, and my family was in the apartment. I thought that they would be safe, and a bomb went off in the building that we had an apartment in. Now, the good news is the buildings in Moscow that I was living in were very, very large, so the bomb was essentially a block away, but it was in fact in the same building. And it was in a small office that was a city office for licensing street vendors. And it was very disconcerting to come home and realize that a bomb went off in the building basically within 48 hours after we moved into the building. Just as distressing was, of course, my wife and my son were there at the time, and I was not. So for them, it was very traumatic to be in this new, difficult country without the support that they really needed. Fortunately, no one was injured to my knowledge, and certainly my family was safe.
Excellent.
Or if not safe, lucky.
I know that you've done quite a bit of work in terms of fundraising for Obama and getting involved in the campaign. Why did you do that initially, and how exactly did you help with that?
Well, I think President Obama's administration is historic. I think we in the country are very fortunate to have the president. As the first president of African descent, it was important to me that he have the support of leaders in the financial and economic community of African descent. I think he has done an extraordinary job given the cards with which he was dealt. He has turned around the economy. He has established health care for all Americans. And he has stood up against some very draconian opposition who are comfortable saying that their primary purpose in life is to keep him from being successful. Some people would call that treasonous, but it's certainly a more confrontational Congress than most presidents in the United States have faced.
You're a senior partner here. What other positions would you say have you learned from, given this position here, or what else have you done, would you say, that complements this?
Well, some of the more exciting opportunities that I've had was I chaired a fund that invested in Central Asia. It was an appointment by President Clinton from 1994 until just after 9/11 in 2001. And I've been fortunate to have been very active in the American Bar Association, where I've had the chance to chair the American Bar Association Center on Human Rights, the section on individual rights and responsibilities, which is the civil rights section, the Young Lawyers Division. I've been fortunate to be able to work with the Bank of England through the Financial Markets Law Committee, which looks at issues relating to systemic challenges to the global economy. I've had many fortunate opportunities.
Great. Very good to hear. What would you say are the keys to your success and to success in general?
Persistence and perseverance. I think it's important, I think it's important to keep your goals in check and understand that nobody has a straight line to success. A career is a long time. Integrity is important. professionalism is important, and not accepting no as an answer is critical. If you understand what your goals are and what you want to do, then you go out and try to achieve those things and deal with the barriers that people put in your way as well as you can.
Given what you know now, imagine you were 15, what words of advice would you give yourself to have accelerated your career and taken you further or faster?
I don't know that I have an answer to that. I wish I understood computers better, but in fact, when I was 17, I studied computer science. It's just that that information is totally obsolete in today's world. I'm not good at predicting where things are going. I followed my interests. It's not possible to decide, for example, at my age, that I want to learn Chinese and understand where the Chinese market is going. But it was possible for me when I was in high school to learn Russian, even though I didn't know how that was going to have a practical impact on my life. It was just what I loved to do. And for a substantial moment in time, what I loved to do corresponded with my business practice and profession. And I think for most people, you hope that they have the opportunity to do what they love to do. That, I suppose, is the thing that I would encourage most people to do, which is do what you love, not do what you think will be profitable. Because if you do what you love, you'll do it well.
Did anyone ever tell you along the way that what you're doing is crazy or foolish or you'll never do it, people like your background won't ever do that? And if so, how did you get around that?
Well, there are a lot of people who thought that because I studied Russian that I was a communist or a radical. I may have had radical tendencies, but they had to do with very much being an American and very much living through the women's movement, the civil rights movement, the Vietnam War. These things played a major role in forging my respect for authority and how I would respond. And they did a lot to help develop my sense of ethics. Russia was an area of interest because of an appreciation for the culture. It wasn't political. I can't honestly say that I ever had great respect for the Soviet political structure. What I had was admiration and respect for the Soviet dissidents and the great writers who wrote about life in an oppressive society. Those people I related to.
And finally, in 20, 30 years' time, if we're looking back over your career, what would you want your legacy to be?
I believe for several clients and a variety of people, I've been able to make a significant difference. I also believe that some of the things that we have done have had impacts above and beyond the people who were my clients and I represented. But one of the things that I hope will be part of my legacy is a trail of proteges who I have been able to develop and watch and go on to do much greater things than, in many cases, they, and in some cases, I imagined. I think that's an important thing. I'm very excited about the prospects of my son and his fiancée and my nieces and nephews, the world that they will have the opportunity to participate in and lead. I think will be a dynamic one and a better one because they're in it.
Great. Thank you very much for your time. And that's another interview for Success Talks.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure.